that we're going to be talking about, a specific individual that we're going to be talking about, I think is not anywhere near well known enough. And I think that the book that our guest, although from Australia, Linda Royale, is going to be speaking about, that book will hopefully bring more attention, well-deserved attention, to Chiune Suigihara, who we'll be hearing about, both from Linda and also from another guest speaker who I'll introduce afterwards, Yossi Krichely. But we also are expecting a guest from the Japanese embassy. He's running a little late because of traffic from Tel Aviv. No one in Israel will be surprised that that's the case, but we'll be hopefully hearing from him shortly. So let me first introduce Linda Margolin Royale, who was born in Sydney, Australia. She trained as a graphic designer and then copywriter, spent 30 years in the advertising industry, both in Australia and the United States, writing TV, radio, and press for major multinationals. This is her first novel, Star on the Grave, and as we'll hear, it was very much a labour of love inspired by her personal family story. Linda Royale.
This is just to get you in the mood. I'll get used to this. Good evening. Okay. My father and Anne Frank were born in 1929, just weeks apart. Anne was murdered in Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in 1944, aged 14, because she was Jewish. My father died of natural causes in 2017, aged 87. He was spared Anne's fate only because of the actions of two brave Gentiles. Two men I'm aiming to immortalise. Good evening to all of you. Thank you for coming. And thank you to the Begin Centre and to Paul Gross for organising this and hosting me. I have come all the way from Sydney, Australia, and this has been a very, very long time coming. So louder. Is more in the that's very low. It doesn't matter. Hello? Is that better? Great. And I've come to launch and publish my book myself, The Star on the Grave in Israel, which I've just had published last year in Australia. And I'm proud to say I've just won the 2025 Australian Jewish Writers Award for Fiction. And it's also a bestseller in Australia, which means many thousands are learning of these two brave men, which was my agenda. A historical fiction novel that is inspired by my family's true story of rescue from the Holocaust, with the true story of Chiune Suigihara and Jan Zwartendijk weaved through in a parallel narrative. Australia is the place where I was born, and I've met a lot of old connections here this evening already. But currently, I am at home here in the Jewish homeland amongst my people. That's how I feel. Not scared to say the things I dare not say in public back there at present, which makes this event all the more pertinent and relevant to me. I've also had to alter my narrative over these past 18 months to not purely be a speech about my book and its contents, but rather a speech that emphasises the themes it contains. Messages I penned long before October 7, but have chillingly become so relevant. In particular, the notion that in many non-Jews worldwide lies a latent, simmering, anti-Semitic tendency sitting quietly that only takes the right circumstances for it to rise to the top and boil over, becoming acceptable behaviour and giving them permission to proudly express it, as we have all seen. And so it did. On the announcement of the release of my Jewish-themed book by my publisher, Vitriolic Trolling. These are just a few of the hundreds of examples that were put on social media within maybe half an hour. My book went to print on October 7. 3 months later, after we had retaliated, this was the result when it hit social. But the one overriding message remains. There are a few exceptional people who will always stand out as shining examples of heroism for standing up against hatred and saving the lives of Jews. And my book must encourage others to follow this path. Sorry, I'm reading so much, but there is a lot of information here. My late father told me a story when he was 80 years old about our family, which changed me forever. I discovered I'm alive because 2 righteous Gentiles risked their lives to save my father and grandparents from the Holocaust. So if, like me, that has happened to any of you, you know it's a pretty powerful thing. I'm Linda Royal, and I shouldn't be alive. I'm the daughter of a Polish Jew born in 1929, so odds were against me ever having been born, given 95% of Polish Jews were murdered by the Nazis. But 2 non-Jewish strangers, diplomats, saved my family and 6,000 others from death. I was a copywriter until my father told me this story of how his parents and he escaped Hitler. I realized then my purpose was to educate, first via film, which I'm currently trying to develop, and book about these 2 amazing souls. The first, Japanese consul Chiune Suigihara, was born in 1900 and passed away in 1986 and lived long enough to learn he saved many thousands. Jans Watendijk, the Dutch consul, never told anyone, or very few, about his wartime deeds. He was a very private man and passed away in 1976, aged 80, having no idea how many thousands he had saved. He apparently knew of just 2 individuals. Sugihara's life was spoken of more by his family. Here is his son Nabuki, with whom I'm well connected. And when I met him, I asked him if I could hug him, being the closest thing to hugging the man to whom I owe my life. He was a little reserved, but after a wink and a nod from his Belgian wife, I went in for the kill. Now, Nabuki, interestingly enough, is a friend of Israel and considers it his homeland, having studied at the Hebrew University here in Jerusalem and living here for 10 years. He's fluent in Hebrew, and the Israeli government offered him a scholarship as thanks to his father for his incredible brave act. And so, in this climate, the worst global anti-Semitism in recent history, I want to not only talk about my story, I also want to delve into what makes someone that righteous person, because we need more of them right now. What does it take, and how does the unique characteristic evolve and develop in someone to have the courage and impetus to be that one that stands up in support of and assists the racially discriminated, the downtrodden, the other? And how can we all learn to emulate that incredible attribute and maybe instill it in others? Naturally, I want you knowing about these individuals and that they're shining examples of this theme, because personally I'm alive because of them. But they also saved 6,000 other strangers fleeing Poland from Hitler's clutches during the Holocaust as they poured into Lithuania in 1940, where these two were stationed. Japanese diplomat Chiune Suigihara happens to be known as the Japanese Schindler. Now, I'm not too keen on that title because I don't think every righteous act can be lumped into one basket. Not taking away from the extraordinary act of Schindler, they were all exceptional people. But each act is unique and precious. Schindler is only known so widely because of Spielberg's movie adaptation of Thomas Keneally's book, but he doesn't define every righteous act, though he is now a household name, something I hope to achieve with these two diplomats. There are now as many as 500,000 descendants of those 6,000, 500,000. What's more incredible is they defied their governments and they had no agenda, no financial or political motive, but simply acted because in their minds it was the right thing to do. These extraordinary men were eventually honored with the title of Righteous Among the Nations by Yad Vashem. This award is bestowed upon individuals who risked their lives to save the lives of Jews during the Holocaust. It all began with Zwartendijk, who issued papers to Dutch Curaçao from Lithuania to a Dutch couple, informing them they now needed a transit visa through Japan in order to get there, via the route you can see here. They went straight to Sugihara, who issued one. In a matter of hours, on hearing of their success, word spread amongst the thousands of refugees, and thousands approached Zwartendijk, who decided at great risk he couldn't say no to these people, even though they were not Polish. Sorry, they were Polish and not Dutch. Then Sugihara was inundated with those same thousands, needing those Japanese transit visas. Sugihara opened the curtains of his consulate one morning in 1940 to find hundreds of desperate people outside the consulate gates. This continued daily for weeks. Sugihara knew all too well the plight for these Jews if they didn't get out. Japan was an ally of Nazi Germany, and he had already personally witnessed the brutality and murderous intent of the local Lithuanians towards the Jews. He'd seen the locals beating up Jews in the streets. He asked the Japanese government 3 times permission to do this. 3 times the answer came back that he was not permitted to do so. But he couldn't abide by this, deciding in consultation with his wife Yukiko that to deny these desperate refugees a chance to escape would be going against God. This is a man who always acted in accordance with justice throughout his life. In the early 1930s, he was put in charge of the Manchurian Railway project and witnessed the brutality of his own people, the Japanese, towards the local Chinese population. And despite the career opportunities this position held for him, he quit. This is my family's visa to freedom, a document that represents life to me. It's in pristine condition because it's actually held by the National Archives of Australia, who I had a legal battle with to try and get it back from. It remains there, but they've taken very good care of it. If you take a good look, there are 3 nations represented. Zwartendijk on behalf of the Dutch on the left there. Sugihara's visa, handwritten in ink in the middle. And on the right, the Australian government who permitted my family just 6 months temporary residency. They ended up being granted citizenship and I was born in Sydney. So where did my writing journey originally begin? Well, something interesting happened to me one day in my first job. I was an advertising copywriter. One lunchtime, I was chatting to the secretary at work. We got to exchanging family stories. Her parents, she said, were from Albania. I said, oh, mine were from Poland. And I laid the same line on her as my opening one this morning, that I shouldn't be alive. To which a blank stare appeared on her face. I said, you know, the Holocaust. 95% Polish Jews were gassed and incinerated. She looked at me with incredulity. I added 6 million were murdered, another blank stare. And then she said, the what? I spent my entire lunch hour educating this 23-year-old. I was a similar age. And then it occurred to me, I took for granted this period in history that surely was common knowledge. I'd been to a Jewish day school. I just thought everybody knew this. It was then I realized I was going to make a point of educating about this whenever and wherever I could. But the more I worked on various advertising accounts, I realized what I was encouraging consumers to do was not exactly earth-shattering. I also wanted to write a significant work eventually, but it needed to be on a topic that really resonated with me. And I needed to have the time to focus on it. So after the toddler rearing was behind me, I had 3 small children in 18 months, and twins is the reason for that. And they are sick of that. Most writers write from personal experience, but nothing significant I felt had happened in my life that forced me to drop everything and start this process. And then about 15 years ago, my late father changed my life. When I discovered from him I'm alive, as are my children and siblings, because a Japanese diplomat with no connection to the Jewish community risked his life to save him and my grandparents from the Holocaust together with 6,000. And why? Simply because it was the right thing to do. To hear that, to be told you are one of the fortunate who were given life because of the actions of one who risked his own is a very powerful feeling. It's indescribable. So there it was, the magic combination. I could use my creativity in a significant way to assist with Holocaust education, hopefully on a global scale. And this was my own family story, an extraordinary one the world needed to know. So I was pumped. I got to reading, researching, interviewing. I went to the US to interview survivors. I learned in my research, though, there's a very common phenomenon amongst them all. They didn't wish to revisit the past, so they compartmentalized their trauma and focused on the future, on the good. This lovely lady is the late Olga Horek, who passed away recently in Sydney. And I have this quote in the beginning of my book, because I think it's very, very relevant. That sometimes they don't revisit the past revisits them. My grandmother and grandfather said goodbye to their parents in Warsaw at the end of 1939 when they were in their early 30s, and they never saw them again. Their entire families went to the gas chambers, but I never saw any tears or despair from my grandmother Felka, who features very prominently in my book. And I've written the prequel, the backstory, and she's actually the main protagonist. She only showed me love and laughter, and anyone who knew her can attest to that. She lived life to the fullest. She never told me this story, and neither did my late father until he was 80. So who am I really, and what inspired the book? My heritage did. Almost my entire family on both my mother's and father's side were sent to Auschwitz or Treblinka. This is my father with his parents in Lithuania in 1940. Here is my father with his paternal grandfather, Samuel, circa 1938, we think. Samuel was hit over the head by a German soldier while helping an old lady to cross the street in the Warsaw Ghetto, and he died where he fell in January 1942. He was lucky. He was spared the fate of the others. This is his grave, which my husband and I had lovingly restored in 2018. My daughters found it in the Warsaw Cemetery when they were on Habonim Shnat, and excitedly called me to tell me it was in such a bad state they could barely recognize it. This is a very chilling photo, and I've donated it to the Jewish Museum in Sydney. This is my other great-grandfather, Shmuel Sput, in the Warsaw Ghetto, my grandmother's father. You can see he's wearing the all too familiar armband with the Star of David. These photos were sent out of the ghetto while they were still permitted to do that. And here is the envelope. As you can see, they have the stamp of the Third Reich and a large Star of David scrawled in red crayon, indicating they had been censored. And on the back of that photo in Polish, it actually says, "Just to let you know that we are all fine," which of course they were not. This is my maternal great-grandmother, and she's holding my father as a baby in 1929. This photo was also sent out of the ghetto to my father and grandparents, who were already safely in Japan in 1941, thanks to that life-saving transit visa. Sorry. On the back, that reads, sorry. "Beloved son, I'm sending you a photograph of Michael. You should remember how important every moment is. This boy is my entire pleasure. Hold on to this photo wherever you are and go, Shmuel." Well, they were all murdered, and June 1942 was the last communication. My father had all the envelopes because he loved collecting stamps. Unfortunately, we didn't have the contents of those envelopes. And then the Nazis invaded. But before the Nazis invaded, this was life in Poland, my father's happy childhood, which was cut abruptly short. Amongst the many tens of millions of Gentiles, a tiny handful of exceptional people went against the crowd despite terrible danger to themselves and to their loved ones, and helped to save others, because in their minds, it was the right thing to do. The power of one, which can be incredible and have far-reaching consequences. Consequences that can be amazing or alternatively devastating. A clear example, Adolf Hitler, and now Hamas also proving the latter. The power of one body through a carefully constructed and orchestrated marketing plan, likely years or decades in the making, to coerce a generation worldwide into believing lies, gaslighting the situation, and making Israel and the Jewish people worldwide the perpetrators of genocide. When I was in Germany a few years ago, I visited one of the most powerful museums I've ever encountered. It's called the Topography of Terror Museum. And if any of you get a chance to visit it, I strongly recommend it. What's so special about it? It doesn't focus on visuals of the Holocaust. It doesn't focus on emaciated corpses and piles of human hair and shoes, abandoned suitcases and gas chambers. No, it focuses on the subtleties of complicit behaviour by a brainwashed and vulnerable population who went along for the ride, choosing not to question, choosing to take part in the worst genocide in the history of humanity, which didn't happen overnight. It took years of propaganda, campaigns, and brainwashing. The power of one gone wrong. Here's an example the museum illustrates. Here's a Jew about to meet his death, about to be shot into a pit. Take a close look. What do you see? A victim. Look at the man about to die. What's chilling is that he doesn't fight back. He's clearly resigned to the fact he's moments from death. He looks straight ahead, forlorn and frightened. But who's he looking at? A photographer. Someone was hired and paid to document the moment. Someone was complicit in this murder, willing to shoot a photograph of the scene, staged and set up from the other side, out of view, with no conscience. An executioner. A German soldier didn't question his task to commit not just murder, but participate in genocide. Bystanders. Finally, the other members of the group, the soldiers standing around nonchalantly watching the murder, having already seen the others already dead in the pit below meet a similar fate. Another day at the office, nobody intervening, nobody caring. This is what happens when evil triumphs, as it currently is for us all. When propaganda is not questioned or challenged, this is what we all need to prevent happening again. We need to educate the masses who have been sucked in. That is what I'm trying to do. We all need to be active participants as members of the human race fighting against inhumanity. We need to encourage others to be that righteous person. I'm trying by promoting the story of two brave individuals who did just that. So, my story, the story I've created, inspired by the true story of Sugihara, and without giving away the content for those of you who are yet to read it, was built around the idea that just because you have been physically saved does not mean you have been emotionally rescued. The scars you carry with you for life and impact your mental well-being, your relationships, and your parenting ability. In summary, the book is about a troubled young woman, 21-year-old Rachel Margold, set in 1968. She's the only child of a very traumatized and disconnected Holocaust-surviving father and has lost her mother at age 9. Her grandmother, Felka, and that is Felka, and that is me with her on my wedding day, is the matriarch and her rock, and is trying to keep the family together. Rachel is an only child and senses something's missing from her life. She just can't put a finger on it. She's just not sure where she belongs. A secret past is revealed, and she's thrown into a journey of discovery and a desire for answers. This sends her on a trip to Japan with her grandmother to thank the man to whom they owe their lives, who had recently been found in 1968. My real desire is that it be a story that represents not just descendants of the Holocaust, but all individuals who've experienced trauma, loss, relocation, and assimilation, and deals with the impact of trauma on survivors and the next generation. I felt it my duty to perpetuate the memory of those whose voices were silenced. Many descendants carry their parents' damage with them as a result. My children tell me regularly I have generational trauma. I'm proud of it. In the case of Hitler, well, his work had far-reaching consequences. The more I connect with descendants worldwide, the more I see the urgency to highlight this. And now, unfortunately, more than at any other time, this work and these uplifting stories of heroism and standing up for oppressed people are vital. So why this book right now? There's certainly a continual interest in historical fiction works inspired by true events based on the Holocaust and post-Holocaust survivors. At this time in my life, when I'm no longer able to ask questions of my long-departed grandparents and my father, how they felt in Poland at the time, I felt it my duty to honour their memory and the memories of all my relatives and all victims murdered by Hitler. If not me, then who? It's an uplifting story of hope and goodness. We need stories such as this in the world now. We need examples such as Sugihara to show what can be done. It is a story of concealed trauma and its impacts, the challenges faced by refugees having to start afresh in new foreign lands, the importance of family and connection to culture and faith, and the power of one person to effect meaningful change. They're all universal themes. What's my process, people ask? Tenacity, 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 and persistence, persistence, persistence. I have been going at it now, 15 years. I'm often asked, how did you transition from copywriter to author? And how did you persevere with no experience and when nobody was paying you? Passion. Passion is my answer. I'm alive because of this man. I loved every minute of it, and it was a chance to immortalize my family's story and the brave, selfless man who risked his life to save my family and so many others. And I learned a lot along the way. Recent studies undertaken just last year have concluded that 30% of young adults in the US and 50% in Europe do not know about the Holocaust. That's serious. My goal, among many others, was and remains to create something lasting in an entertaining and engaging format that will inadvertently educate a global audience with the reach that only book and hopefully cinema or TV can achieve, so that the world never forgets. Some of you will argue you can simply watch a documentary. I say to you all, the bottom line is drama by way of book and hopefully movie is more attractive to the average person than a dry documentary. And unlike museums, which are a vital part of every community, they still require much legwork to encourage visits, and they can't do it alone. Their important work needs to be supplemented by entertaining and enthralling books and cinema, which reach small communities and tiny villages, and are often the only way many people can learn without accessibility to museums, which are the obvious first port of call. And these books will encourage further research. Nobody had heard of Oskar Schindler until Tom Keneally wrote his wonderful book, and Spielberg's movie based on this book was released. I'm so honored to have had Tom Keneally read and endorse this book, and thrilled to have had my lovely friend Nabuki Sugihara, only surviving son of Chiune Suigihara, value my efforts. The greatest endorsement of all. My work, as I've said, is designed to be a story that will educate the world about trauma, assimilation due to fear, the importance of family and connection to culture, thinking for oneself, doing what is right when faced with a choice, as Sugihara did, and Jan Zwartentijk did, and the impact of those decisions. How can we ultimately learn from these individuals to be the best possible version of ourselves and encourage others? Start small, aim high, speak to one person at a time. Trust me, I've done this. I've done many events, and you cannot blanket educate. You can't shout at the masses. They won't listen. I've tried. We're all trying in the diaspora, day in and day out, on social media, trying to sway the masses who are choosing to gobble up the narrative Hamas and the Palestinians throw at them. Douglas Murray, Colonels Richard Kemp and Michael Scott, Mark Leach, Nova Peris, Erin Molan are all righteous Gentiles in my eyes. Any non-Jew putting their safety and lives on the line to speak out about the gross misinformation perpetrated by terrorists with a well-honed media strategy is our ally, and we must protect and honour them. It only takes one to change the world. It could mean life or death for others. I'm living proof. Here I am in New York about 6 years ago with just a few hundred of the estimated 500,000 descendants of life-saving Sugihara visa recipients who would agree with me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Linda. That was really fascinating. We'll have an opportunity to ask questions of Linda shortly about the book and her story and other things. And I want to now welcome a very special guest. We're really honored to have with us a representative from the Embassy of Japan, Dr. Yoshi Higuchi, who's the cultural attaché.
Thank you. And first of all, I'd like to say sorry to be delayed to arrive this evening because I live in Tel Aviv. It took many hours. I'm sorry. So as Japanese, we're supposed to be here on time always. Sorry about it. And always, first of all, happy being here in Jerusalem, especially for the person who live in Tel Aviv. Very special atmospheres and special feelings. And every time I participate this event to commemorate Sugihara, always I ask myself, if I was him, if I could do the same thing as he did. Even this evening, I asked myself, it's very difficult. So I understand his behaviors, how brave he has, because each person has humanities. I also have sympathy to the people with difficulties, but I also belong to the systems. I have to follow and criteria and system guidance. So I need to fight these things, but Sugihara didn't. So I really understand his behaviors. Thanks to being Japanese diplomat here in Israel, I had some chance to meet survivors and families, and always telling me about the stories, how they saved thanks to the visas that Sugihara issued. So it's not us, but you keep telling the stories and expanding this message to the world. So I really appreciate this occasion and these books and stories. Last but not least, just recently, I just discovered my neighbor in the apartment in Tel Aviv. She's like 60s age. Suddenly she said, you know what? I have a very strong connection with Japan. So I said, oh, what? You know what? My mother survived in the war thanks to Sugihara's visa. You know his name? Of course I know. So it is kind of, surprise and excitement, and also make me very happy and very also proud. And sorry, I also wanted to mention first things, because in these difficult days, I really want to say that in Japan, we didn't have any anti-Semitic histories, even now. So I think this is one of the reasons why Japan became very popular destination among Israeli, also Jewish people to fly to Japan. This is one of my missions to encourage people, please come to Japan, please come to Japan. Now, what this problem is, Japan became so popular. So in 2 weeks, I'm flying back to Japan to visit, but it's very difficult to find a flight. Thank you very much for me.
Okay, before we get to questions, we have one more very special guest speaker. I'd like to introduce Yossi Krichely, who is the former director of the Sugihara Museum in Japan.
Not exactly.
He will clarify, and I will have words with whoever gave me that information. But he is he's certainly an expert on Sugihara, and back in Israel, he's an expert on all things Japan, including he's a karate teacher. So if anyone takes issue with anything he says, don't get into a fight with him afterwards. So without further ado, yes.
Thank you very much. Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the introduction and for the hospitality. I would like to congratulate Linda, whom I know online for the past several years, since I started operating the Chiune Suigihara Israel Facebook page. And Linda is one of the contributors, and also Mr. Higuchi. And I would like also to acknowledge a person that I didn't think will be here tonight, Mr. Bershore. Mr. Bershore is one of the last Sugihara survivors still alive. And he was 14 years old when his family, his brother-in-law, received the Sugihara visa from Sugihara. And together with his sister, brother-in-law, they traveled, they made all the long voyage through Russia, through Siberia, to Japan, and from there to New Zealand. So I'm very happy to see you. 96 years old. 98. 98 years old. I'm not very accustomed to speaking English because of course, my mother tongue is Hebrew. And usually when I address a crowd, it's either in Japanese or in Hebrew. But the last time I spoke to a crowd in English was 8 years ago in Lithuania, in Kaunas. I was invited to take part in the Sugihara week that they do there in Kaunas. And I spoke at the Sugihara house, which is actually the former consulate. The Sugihara used to live and work there, and where he gave the visas. And I went there, and I was invited there, and I spoke about Sugihara and about the town of Yaotsu. Now, the town of Yaotsu, Mr. Gross introduced me as the former director, which is slightly off. I was a CIR of Yaotsu town, which is CIR means Coordinator of International Relations. And I was working at the city hall. I was actually a clerk in the city hall in Japan. And I was recruited by the Japanese embassy here in Israel. And one of the people that was sitting on the board just went out. Well, that's all. He was sitting on the board of the people who interviewed me for that 24 years ago. That's him over there. And I owe him quite a lot. And as I said, I worked there for 3 years, and but I was asked to speak very, very shortly today. Usually when I speak for about an hour, sometimes 2 hours even. I speak about Sugihara very passionately. But today, I'm not going to talk about Sugihara directly, but you will see. Anti-Semitism in East Asia, a personal perspective, my perspective, of course. Okay, I mentioned the Facebook page that I'm operating, and Ms. Royal is a contributor of. The Chiune Suigihara, Chiune Suigihara, Chassidut Olam. You are more than welcome to look it up. First of all, let me introduce you shortly to the town of Yaotsu. The town of Yaotsu is a very, very small town. It's about 10,000 people population. It's located in the middle of, not in the middle, but in the southern east corner of the Gifu prefecture, not far from Nagoya, about an hour from Nagoya, maybe 3 hours from Kyoto, by car on the highway. And here are some images of Yaotsu. You can see here, this is right here. It's the visa monument commemorating Sugihara and the visas that he wrote. And here is, of course, some images of the town itself. Now, Yaotsu is Sugihara's birthplace. It's where he was born on the, Linda Royal mentioned 1900, but I'll be a little bit more accurate. The 1st of January, 1900. He was born on the first day of the century, okay, on the 10th of the century. And when he was born, the delivery, how do you say that? The person who helps deliver, the midwife. The midwife told his father that if he was born on such a date, probably he's gonna do great things. And this is what as you know, he did. And this is me in Yaotsu. I was the CIR in Yaotsu, Coordinator of International Relations, or Kokusai Koryuin in Japanese, between 2001 and 2004. You can see me in the middle, sitting there at my desk, holding the map of Israel, it says. It says there, Israel Kok. But as you see, you can hardly see Israel on the map. Okay? There's a small red dot there, and that's Israel, of course. On the left corner, you can see me guiding Japanese school children that came to visit the museum, and I was walking them around and showing them the visa and explaining to them about Sugihara. And on the left, you can see, on the right, sorry, you can see we had a ceremony in 2003, maybe 2004, the beginning of 2004, commemorating the 100,000th visitor to the Sugihara Museum. Okay, that's 3 years or 4 years after the museum was opened. Now it's been 25 years since that, and it's way past 500,000 visitors. And as I said, the Yaotsu town is very, very small. It's 10,000 people only. Mostly, let's say the average age will be over 50 in that town, because the population is very elderly. Very few children are born in Yaotsu these days, which is a shame. And the town population is declining. When I arrived in Yaotsu in 2001, it was 15,000. Now it's less than 10,000 people living in Yaotsu. On the right, you can see Mr. Shingo Akatsuka, who was the mayor of Yaotsu. And we became very, very good friends right from the first meeting that we had. He looked at me and they asked me, can you drink? And I told him, I'm Georgian, of course I can drink. And the next day, we went on a welcome party that they threw for me, and I beat him. And since then, we became very, very good friends. And he took me to a lot of events and places, asked me to talk about Israel, which I did quite a lot. Here you can see, this is the Sugihara Museum. And in the middle, you can see the pamphlet of the Sugihara Museum. Okay, on the right side, you can see the Hebrew version of the pamphlet of the Sugihara Museum, and I have it right here. This is the pamphlet, the Hebrew version of the pamphlet. I have a few copies over there, so if anybody is interested later on, you can feel free to take one. And when I arrived there, the museum was fully Japanese. Nothing was in English, nothing, of course, was in Hebrew. Okay, it was very early, a few months after it was opened. And I told them, listen, guys, if you want people who are not Japanese speakers like me to come and understand what's going on, you need to translate everything. So they told me, okay, this is why you're here. And that's what I did. I translated all the not artifacts, but everything in the museum. Everything in the museum, of course, the pamphlets, the movie, there's the movie that they show in the museum, and everything else. I see a lady over there nodding, affirming my what I'm saying. So probably you visited the museum.
No.
Okay, no. Okay, so you should one of these days. And also, I did quite a lot of other things, not regarding Sugihara. For example, I was invited to many schools in Yaotsu, in the towns and cities around Yaotsu, to speak to the school children. Here you can see I was asked to do something regarding Jewish holidays. So it was around December. I said, okay, no problem, Hanukkah. And we did Hanukkah. We also did Purim in Yaotsu. We did Adloyada in Yaotsu. We did a lot of things. And here I'm speaking in front of 300 school principals in the prefecture of Mie, which is a little bit south of Gifu. And here, with the group of people whom I formed with the Israel-Gifu Friendship Association. So I did quite a lot of things, but this is not what I want to talk about today, okay? Mr. Sugihara, Ms. Royal was very, very informative about Mr. Sugihara, Mr. Jan Svartednik, whom together, helped save so many people, 6,000 Jews, and the numbers are not decisive. Nobody exactly knows how many people are alive today because of Sugihara. But they see 1, 2, 3 over there that are alive. And of course, Mr. Short and his daughter are alive here because of what Mr. Sugihara did. And later on, I'll show you 2 more people that are alive because of what Mr. Sugihara did. And you can see on the right, the people that also Mr. Royal showed of the refugees standing outside the consulate and asking Sugihara, help us. And he did with the visas that he had written, 2,139 visas that he wrote and gave to refugees. And probably there are more visas which the refugees copied or forged. There were a few forgeries among those visas, but eventually the Japanese accepted everybody. And many say that the Japanese government said no to Sugihara, forbade him to help the refugees, but it is not exactly true. They told him, you can help whoever has the correct or the right, documentation, has the funds, for the very, very long trip. You can help those people. But Sugihara, of course, he saw them. He saw that they have nothing. So he decided to give them, those visas. And when they arrived at Vladivostok, the Japanese government could tell them, don't board the ships. You're not welcome in Japan. But they did not. And they accepted everyone. And all the refugees, even without the prior consent of the Japanese government, arrived safely in Japan and from there prospered in Japan and other places overseas. But I'm not talking about Sugihara today. as I said. I want to talk about anti-Semitism in the Far East or in East Asia. Okay, first of all, a very quick rundown about anti-Semitism in the global arena, as Ms. Royal mentioned in her lecture, and we did not coordinate. Not at all. I thought also I talk about anti-Semitism because I don't have enough time to tell you the full story of Sugihara. So of course I don't have to give you the examples, burning of Jews in Bavaria and Germany, all the Nazi depictions of Jews, the blood libels that our people suffered for hundreds of years all over Europe or even in America. Jews not allowed. In the 30s, 40s, before that, prior to that, there was anti-Semitism rampant in America as well. Still is in some places. So anti-Semitism is as long as history, since the Jews lost Judea, lost our ancestral land, and were exiled, anti-Semitism was born. And you can see recently, as Ms. Royal again mentioned, all those events in many places, in Europe mostly, but also in America and other places of all those people shouting from the river to the sea without really understanding what they mean. Because if the river to the sea realizes and materializes, we will not be sitting here. We'll be somewhere else. And unfortunately, the governments of those countries, instead of stopping that and blocking it with the iron hammer, with the iron fist, they're allowing those demonstrations of hate and terror to take place in many places in Europe and also places like Australia, which is very unfortunate because until a few years ago, Australia was a great friend of Israel. Until the government changed, and when governments change, parties change, things change as well. So America, Europe, Australia, all suffer from this type of demonstrations and anti-Israel hateful. I was mentioned that I'm also a karate teacher, and I am. I started doing karate when I was 14 years old, and this is what led me to Japan eventually. I was in Japan, and I lived in Japan for 7 years. And 6 years ago, when the corona broke, I was into business. I was practicing karate for my sake, but not anything else. But when corona broke and everybody sat at home, I decided to teach in Zoom. Okay, to the neighbors in my apartment building, and for 2 months I taught them in Zoom. And after the curfew, or not the curfew, it was raised, the quarantine was raised. I said, okay, this is it. So they said, what do you mean? This is not it. And since then I've been continuing, and I have many students, as you see, children, adults. And right here in the middle, this is one of my Japanese senseis, Sensei Yamaguchi, who came to visit in 2023 and came to give a lesson and a seminar in my dojo as well. And it is my goal and my aim now to raise lions. And this is what I do. I teach them first of all, the techniques of karate, how to defend themselves. And later, tzionut. I add it to all my trainings, all my sessions. And each session is finished with everybody raising their hands and shouting Am Israel Chai. Okay? So not doing anything else, nothing in Japanese, not kiais, Am Israel Chai. This is how we end the lesson. And why am I showing you this? In Japan as well, unfortunately, there have been demonstrations against Israel. Now, when I was living in Japan, living in Yaotsu, it was during the second Intifada. And during the second Intifada, the Japanese media was vehemently pro-Arab against Israel. It still is. And the Japanese media, like media in other places, like some of the media here in Israel as well, is anti-Israel. And what the Japanese are getting from the media is usually very, very biased information. And when I was in Yaotsu, I told you, I was going to places, giving lectures, talking about Israel, about our side of the story. And many people came to me and asked me, listen, we're happy to hear that because this is the first time we hear it from the Israeli side. And at that time, I created a website. It was called the Shinjitsu. Emet. Shinjitsu in Japanese means emet, truth. And I wrote articles there and the stories from Israel and showing our side of the story. Now, most Japanese today as well don't really know our side of the story. Okay, some do. Some do. You can see here. There's a demonstration or a parade, pro-Israeli parade. But the others are mostly pro-Palestine. However, unfortunately, those are very, very small movements. It's not like in London, where you see 100,000 people parading and shouting death to Israel. These are a couple hundred people, not more than that. And most of the Japanese don't mind them. Okay, they don't really take heed to what they're saying. So there is some anti-Israel sentiment in Japan as well. And in 2024, last year in July, we were about to go, me, my karate team, and my colleagues as well. I'm part of the JKS Israel karate organization. JKS stands for Japan Shoto Renmei, which means Japan Karate Federation. And we are part of this global federation, which encompasses around 70 countries around the world with more than 100,000 participants. And we had the World Championships held in Tokyo. Now, since I know Japan and I know the Japanese media, and I saw some of the demonstrations, I was a little bit hesitant because, as you saw in the previous slide, they don't only demonstrate, but also they wreck sporting events. Lately they kicked Israeli athletes from sports venues, etc. And I was a little bit anxious about going. Although I know Japan very well, I was a little bit anxious. And luckily and happily, I was anxious for nothing because the Japanese greeted us warm-heartedly and hosted us as just like all the other guests. And many of our friends from around the world, from England, from Australia, New Zealand, from Denmark, from France, came to us and told us, listen, we are thinking about you all the time. We hear all the stories on the news, but we know you. You are our friends, and we pray for you. And I was a referee in the tournament, and my daughter, right here, standing next to the Japanese sensei that you saw in the earlier picture, right here, this is my daughter. She also participated in the tournament. And you see him holding the Israeli flag, okay? And you see all the Israeli flags in the venue, and nobody touched them. We were there for 3 days. The Israeli flags, among other flags of other nations as well, were there in the venue. Nobody touched them, nobody moved them, nobody burned them. There was no Palestinian flag in the crowd. There was nobody shouting Free Palestine or something like that in the crowd, and Japanese people. It was a sporting event with the children, no politics. So we had an amazing time in the tournament, and we stayed for a month in Japan, me and my family, and walked the streets of Tokyo, spoke Hebrew, no problem. Nobody harassed us. We never saw anything that gave us or made us feel uneasy. Just like Yoshi Higuchi said, okay, Japan does not take part in that. And the last slide, or the one before last month, we were in Thailand. And also in Thailand, the same thing. No Free Palestine, nothing like that. And you can see that my family is a little bit unique, okay? And why is that? Because my wife is Japanese. And I married her when I was in Yaosu. So my kids are half Japanese, half Israeli, and they also have Japanese passport as well. And lately, a year ago, my Japanese wife started working in the embassy in the visa section. Okay? So my kids are those two additional Sugihara descendants. Because if not for Sugihara, I wouldn't go to Yaosu to work. I wouldn't meet her. I wouldn't marry her. They wouldn't be born. Maybe I would have other kids. I don't know. And another amazing story. I don't have a slide here, but I don't know how, I don't know why, what Hashgacha Eliona made that happen. But when I was looking for a teacher, for a tutor a tutor for my son's bar mitzvah. I got an email from this organization that helps people find, tutors for bar mitzvahs. And the name on the email was Yair Bar Haftig. Now, if you know the name Bar Haftig, you will understand the connection. Okay, so Zerah Bar Haftig, he wasn't mentioned. Zerah Bar Haftig was one of the prominent Jews working with Sugihara, and later on he became a minister and a Mafdalnik minister in the Israeli government. And his grandson, okay, happened to become my son's bar mitzvah tutor. Both of them Sugihara descendants, the grandson as well. And as I said, we were in Thailand and we had a good time. And when people asked us where we were from, even if they ask my wife, where you're from, she can easily say, I'm from Japan. She looks Japanese. My kids can easily say, we're from Japan. No, my wife said, I'm from Israel as well. Okay? She's proud to be Israeli. And when 2 years ago, you probably don't know this, but 2 years ago when the war started, the Japanese government sent airplanes to evacuate Japanese civilians or citizens living in Israel, whoever wanted to evacuate. And a few hundred people took that opportunity, Japanese, and flew back to Japan because nobody knew what's going to happen, right? Everybody was worried. We were thinking about Iran will attack, Hezbollah will attack, everybody will attack us, even though Biden said no or don't. But my wife said, no, I trust the IDF and I will stay here with my husband, with my family, and we will not evacuate. So why am I telling you all this story and how does it connect to anti-Semitism in Asia or in East Asia? It doesn't, because there's no anti-Semitism in East Asia. I lived 7 years in Japan. I traveled the entire region, many places. I was never biased against. I was never discriminated because I'm Jewish or because I'm Israeli. Okay, never felt hate. If I did something wrong and I deserved it, yes. And this is what the Japanese and the East Asian people mostly do. They respect everyone. They accept everyone. If you behave. If you don't behave, they kick you out. Okay? And this is the mentality that Sugihara grew up with. Okay? Do the right thing. If you do the right thing, you're entitled for everything. If you respect others, you gain respect as well. But if you don't respect, then you shouldn't accept others to respect you. And one last thing about this, the human rights conversation. I believe that everybody deserves human rights if he respects the human rights of others as well. Because if you don't deserve it as well. Thank you very much. I'm sorry.
Okay, what we're going to do is take some questions. Just a second. Okay, so we have a little bit of time, and what I suggest is that if you have questions about that, I think we should take advantage of Yossi Krichely's extensive knowledge of Sugihara. If you have questions about Sugihara, put them to Yossi. And if you have questions about Linda's book, about the process of writing the book, about her personal experience, about her family history, then Linda. You could have do Yossi, but a bit strange. So let's start with lady here. Yes.
I wondered whose impetus it was to make the Sugihara Museum.
Okay, just for those on Zoom that may not have heard, whose impetus was it to create the museum, the Sugihara Museum?
It's a long story. I tried to make it short. In 1989, Miss Yukiko Sugihara, the wife, published the book Inochi no Visa, Visas for Life. And in the book, it's written that Yaotsu is the hometown of Sugihara. Now, before that book, nobody knew about Sugihara and about what he did in Japan. It became a bestseller. And several years ago, Sugihara Chiune was elected as one of the most prominent Japanese men of the 20th century. Now, when Yaotsu town council heard about it, they were surprised. They didn't know that somebody like that was born and lived in Yaotsu. So they decided to do something to commemorate him. And in 1992, they founded the Jindo no Oka Koen, which is the Park of Humanity in Yaotsu, just took a mountain, raised it, okay, built a very, very nice park. You saw in one of the pictures the Visa monument. It's part of the park. And in 2000, they established the museum itself, so 25 years ago. So that is a very long story and a very short explanation.
Okay, yes, lady at the back.
Two questions. I read the book, so I'm trying not to do spoilers. But why did Sugihara, was he sacked from the Foreign Service? Why did he go to such anonymity and go and live in Russia? And why didn't his wife go with it?
Those are the questions. Those are the two questions.
Yeah.
Well, according to, not according, but in contradiction to common knowledge, Sugihara was not really fired from the foreign ministry. He came back to Japan in 1947 after 2 years in a Soviet POW camp in Romania. And when he came back in 1947, Japan was not an independent country. It was under the American occupation. And America gave Japan a constitution, abolished the military laws that were before that, and actually was the dominant rule over Japan. And even the Japanese foreign affairs were controlled by America. So when he came back, okay, to the Foreign Office, they told him, listen, we don't need you. Just like we fired thousands of others, we have nothing to do with you right now. So they gave him his pension, and then he went, to work in other places. Now, why did he go to Russia alone? Because in Japan, it's quite common that when the husband, for example, has work or even is sent to work for long periods of time in a different place, the wife stays with the children, okay, with the family, where the children are still getting their education. They're not moving around or not doing relocation like we do, okay, here in Israel or in the West. Maybe now things are a little bit different in Japan as well. But at those times, when you do relocation, you do it alone. And your wife and family don't come with you.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I'm also a second generation. My mother and father survived Bergen-Belsen and Bogen-Belsen. My parents were Holocaust survivors.
Sorry, we can't hear back here.
I'll repeat the question.
I'll speak up.
Okay.
My parents were Holocaust survivors, and I found the picture of you on your wedding day with your grandmother poignant. And my question is, did I understand correctly? My parents also compartmentalized. And oh boy, they really did. But they were also very optimistic people. Did I hear correctly that there was some depression, but also hopefulness? Your grandmother was very forward. I'm trying to understand that.
If there was depression, I never saw it. She was the life of every party. It's not on.
This one.
Sorry. Okay, so.
I'll repeat. Can you hear that?
No, it's not on. It's not on.
There we go. If there was any depression, I never saw it. She was the life of the party. She laughed. She apparently, according to people that knew her, told me she danced on tables and drank vodka. She was a bit of a character. I never saw any depression. However, when I was doing my research, I was looking back on old photos and came across my wedding photos. I looked into her eyes and her face and was hit by this trauma hidden behind that look, which was unmistakable. Like, she was obviously, very much in love with me, and she was very, enamored with the fact that I was getting married, but there was this sadness behind her eyes. Yeah.
Lots of questions, Jeff.
Linda, first of all, thank you for sharing with us and your family's journey and their experiences. But I'm wondering, why is it that righteous Gentiles up in Yad Vashem, yes, they have a section devoted to them there, but they don't get the exposure that they really deserve. Why do you think that is? I had a family who got out of Germany in 1940, made it to Holland in 1940, got caught there by the Blitz, and they were hidden underground between The Hague and Amsterdam for the entire duration of the war. And so I traveled to Holland very, very often between the United States and Israel. And I speak to the Dutch there speak English better than I do. And I asked them about the righteous Gentiles in Holland, and they really don't know very much about them. Why do you think that is?
I don't know what Yossi has to say about it. From my research, I think a lot of the righteous were very, and I'm connected, you probably know of a guy called, I think his name's Johnny Daniels.
Yes, yeah,
Yes.
I know it very well.
And he takes care of righteous. He goes around Europe and he makes sure, especially during the coronavirus, that they had medication, that they had transport, that they had food. And he's got a whole charity set up for that. I mean, they're unfortunately dying out, but they're very humble, beautiful people that didn't do it for recognition. So they never talked about it. And only the people that they influenced or they saved are really the ones that know about it. So I think from my understanding, it's that they don't want the limelight and they shied away from it, just like Zwartendijk, the Dutch consul, I believe, was much more of a recluse. And I think Sugihara was a bit of a recluse as well. I mean, he had no idea. Nabuki tells me when they found out, he thought that he'd only saved maybe 2 or 3 people. So when he found out how many he had saved, he was completely overwhelmed as well. Yeah.
Yes, lady.
In your book, the heroine doesn't know that she's Jewish. You went to day school. So it's very different because the heroine finds out when she's about to get married. Why?
Okay, no more spoilers. Erase the last few seconds of your memories, ladies and gentlemen.
It does not spoil the book.
It doesn't.
It
No.
doesn't
Okay.
at all. And
Okay.
you find out very quickly
Okay.
in the book.
But your question is,
But so I wanted to know, how often did this happen? Did you meet a lot of Australians who hid the fact that they had been Jewish?
Yes. So what spoiler alert?
It
Not.
really isn't.
It happens very quickly in the book. It's irrelevant. It's just So don't worry, it hasn't been spoiled. Yes, there are, particularly amongst the Hungarian Holocaust survivors, a lot of them concealed their heritage and brought up their children. Some of them knew they were Jewish, but they just weren't practicing Jews, but a lot of them concealed it. And I knew of 2 who didn't know until the university days and started meeting Jewish people at university in Sydney and came home and questioned their parents and found out that way. So I interviewed both of them and to get quite an accurate impression of how that felt. Yeah.
okay, we have a lot of questions. Okay, there are 3 hands up, I think. So let's just take those 3 questions. If anyone has other questions at the end, you can maybe approach our guests and ask them. Yes.
Look, I would like, first of all, it's a real fascinating evening, all 3 speakers, and of course, Paul, really interesting. Linda, I want to ask you, interesting what you're saying, because you were saying that speaking to the masses, speaking, like that doesn't really work, because everyone's in their own headspace, which makes a lot of sense. However, I've noticed on YouTube, there are certain people, one station is trigonometry with Constance Kissin, Francis Foster, the other one, my 2C. Now, very interestingly, the reason trigonometry is now doing so much coverage of the whole conflict in the Middle East and about the Islamization of Europe is because Kissin said that he had Melanie Phillips on, and he really didn't know. He had her on because she was controversial and things. He really didn't know that much about the Jews' historical right to land of Israel until he had her on the program. As a result, he talks about it a lot. So in a way, it is a case of kind of doing everything, isn't it? Because we can't just say, oh, it's a waste of time. I know you can waste a lot of time arguing with people or whatever. That definitely is a waste. But social media does have a place in this as well, doesn't it?
It does have a place, but you have to do it from my experience of trying to refute what people are saying on social media.
Oh, yeah.
You have to do it respectfully. You can't shout at them and try and shove down. They don't want to know about child remains, about rapes. They don't want to know. This has given people permission to be anti-Semitic. So it's like, oh, well, I sort of kind of didn't really like the Jews. I felt a bit anti-Semitic, but everyone else is jumping on the bandwagon. Oh, wow, I can actually be out and proud. What you have to do is educate them, but you have to gently educate them. You have to say respectfully, I understand your point of view and where you're coming from and how it appears to you, and then you just have to lay down the facts and not get emotional and say, these are the facts. Number one, number two, number three, and you're welcome to talk to me further about it. Or I suggest you look up Douglas Murray.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. But what I'm saying really is that I share those things. That's what I do. When I see those videos, I share them on Facebook and think that's what I do. Yeah. So I'm not doing the talking, except to say, watch this and share or whatever. And so I do think that that's powerful. That's the only thing I was going to say.
But sharing them to the masses. I do a lot of talks which are way more intimate than this. I'll sometimes do a library talk to 6 people. And the beauty is, well, they're people our age and older. They're not the young woke generation who have been, influenced at university and by US college campus behavior. But if you do it one-on-one and you just give them a few little, they come in and they say, I don't understand anti-Semitism. Why is there so much anti-Semitism? Respectful non-Jewish people. And I just say to them, because you have to do the whole thing for them. Zionism equals Judaism in these people's eyes. Therefore, everybody in the world is an Israeli. Therefore, they're Jewish. Therefore, hate all the Jews. And you've just got to break it down and say, no, that's not true. And just give them a tiny bit of education.
Okay. Yes, John.
Most of the Sugihara stories that I've heard, the family spent the war years in Shanghai. Is that true of your family?
Yossi, you can correct me here or not, but
I think he asked you about your family.
My family didn't. From what I understood, the Joint Distribution Committee tried to find the relatives and friends of people around the world and who could sponsor them to come out to those countries. That's why mine came to Australia, because my grandmother had 2 brothers here, and the 900 remaining Kobe Jews who couldn't find refuge anywhere were shipped to Shanghai because the Japanese knew they were about to invade Pearl Harbor and they didn't want refugees. But Yossi might.
Yossi?
Most of the survivors, first of all, everybody got a 14-day transit visa to Japan. But of course, the Japanese government understood that it's going to take more than 14 days for them to, get processed and everything and find the next stop that they're headed to. But those people who didn't find, didn't go to either Australia, New Zealand, Argentina, Eretz Israel, the United States, were shipped to Shanghai because Shanghai was under Japanese rule, under Japanese control. And Japan eventually didn't want them to stay too long in Japan because of the obvious reasons of the looming war and everything. But also, the Japanese government at that time was a martial government. It was the Japanese imperial government. And having too many foreigners in Japan at that time, in their mind, could lead to undesired consequences. So eventually, after up to 6 months, they decided to send everybody somewhere. And Shanghai was the only option for those people who didn't find visas or grants to go to other, Western countries.
Okay. Yes. Last question.
Okay.
No pressure.
I was struck by the architecture of the Sugihara Museum, and I'm wondering if there's any story related to that.
Well, actually, it doesn't resemble any Japanese building.
Right.
Okay, because you know how Japanese buildings or traditional buildings look like. It's more akin to Lithuanian or Baltic area architecture. And one of the architects or the advisors was I think Estonian that helped them design or sketch the museum. And eventually they wanted to bring a bit of Europe, okay, to the countryside of Japan. So that's the motif, a Baltic structure.
Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I want to firstly thank Linda Morel very, very much. Firstly, for writing this. And the sense of mission behind it, and the personal story behind it, I think gives it an extra potency and an extra sort of reason for us to read it and learn from it. So thank you very much, and thank you for coming and being with us all the way from Australia. Yossi, thank you so much for joining us as well. And of course, Dr. Yossi Krichely from the Cats and Japanese Embassy. I want to just add that as we're here at the Begin Center, some of you will know, especially those of you who've been to the museum here, that one of the very first things Menachem Begin did after becoming Prime Minister, just as events would transpire, was he ordered the rescuing of Vietnamese refugees, Vietnamese boat people who were floating in the sea and no countries would take them. We actually have here, I think, in our archives, a letter that he sent to Margaret Thatcher, asking why Britain wasn't taking people in. And the quote, forgive me that I don't remember it verbatim, but paraphrasing, he said essentially that the history of the Jewish people tells us that even when the world is silent, we should stand up against injustice. And I think that is very much the lesson that we learn also from Sugihara and other great righteous Gentiles. So thank you all for coming. Thank you very much. And of course, the book is on sale outside. You can buy it and Linda will sign it for you. And those of you watching at home, you can order it from Amazon. And Gemar Khatima Tova.